Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam Hilchah Shechita at the very beginning, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph. And the Rambam says, Mitzvahs asay sheyishchait mir sheyirtze lechel b'sar behema chayav v'yev v'achakach yechal. There's a positive commandment in the Torah that you should shecht. Whoever wants to eat the meat of an animal, wild beast, fowl, and only then can he eat. And he brings a pasuk where it says "V'zavachtem mit karcha mitzeincha," and he brings other sources as well. So the Rambam makes it very clear, as many of the commentators make it clear as well, that Shechita is a positive commandment. It's one of the 348 positive commandments. The Ramban disagrees. The Ramban says that it's not really a mitzvah. It's only if you want to eat, you can't eat unless you shecht it. But it's not really a mitzvah. So what's the nafkamina halacha? Everyone agrees that you have to shecht an animal in order to eat it. So the Pri Megadim in his psicha to Hilchah Shechita, brought by the Minchas Chinuch, Mitzvah Taf Nun Aleph, gives a nafkamina halacha that if a person makes a shvuah that he's not going to eat a chatzi zayis, a half a zayis of meat, a nevela that wasn't slaughtered. Normally a shvuah does not take effect on a mitzvah of the Torah because we already have a shvuah. The Torah was given to us, administered a shvuah, an oath to us. But chatzi shir, which is forbidden, but it's not mentioned in the Torah, the shvuah does take effect. That's because when it comes to nevela, the prohibition of nevela, the Torah refers to it as a prohibition of eating, and eating requires a kazayis. That's what the Torah says is forbidden. Chatzi shir is based on another source. Now, that's true only if it's only a negative commandment to eat an nevela, an animal that was killed, that was not slaughtered. But according to the Rambam, that it's a mitzvahs essay. Mitzvahs essay, here the Torah doesn't talk about eating as a chiyuv, as an obligation to eat, or an obligation not to eat. So even if it's less than the shir, it would be prohibited by the Torah, explicitly, because the Torah doesn't make any distinction. So the essay would be there even if it's less than a shear. In that case, there's no shvuah. The shvuah does not take effect, does not devolve. That's the Pri Megadim's nafkamina. The Minchas Chinuch himself says another nafkamina. Normally, whenever the Torah says you're not allowed to eat something, and it uses the term of eating, not eating, if you eat it shaloi kederech achila, and not in the normal way of eating, it's not biblically forbidden. It's only rabbinically forbidden. But according to the Rambam, that there's a mitzvahs asay over here, you would violate the mitzvahs asay even if you do it shaloi kederech achila, because only when the Torah talks about the negative, don't eat in the vela, there it has to be considered eating. And shaloi kederech achila, it's not eating. But if we're talking about the mitzvahs asay, that you're obligated to shech the behema, then there's no basis to make a distinction between the derech achila and not derech achila. That's another nafkamina. A third nafkamina I found in a sefer called Mitzvahs HaMelech, who brings Rabbi Kiva Eger in Yeridea. He brings in the name of the placey, who says the following: if you have an animal that is about to die and you want to shecht it before it dies, so you'll have the ability to eat the meat, and the only knife you have is a knife of Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to use and benefit from Avodah Zarah. But Shechita is a mitzvah. And if it's a mitzvah, there's a klal in Shas, mitzvahs lav lehenes nitten. Mitzvahs were not given for hana. It's not considered that you had hana, you had benefit from it, because you just did a mitzvah. That's if you say it's a mitzvah. But if you say it's not a mitzvah, there's no mitzvah saseh, it's just you're not allowed to eat without shechita, then the fact that you're benefiting from this knife, it's not just a mitzvah, would be forbidden, because you are having hana. But then the question could be asked, what exactly do we mean when we say it's a mitzvahs asay? The Kesef Mishnah brings that there are those who say that there is no mitzvah. It's not like tefillin, tzitzit, shofar, and lulav. That even the Rambam agrees that the mitzvah of shechita is unlike tefillin, tzitzit, shofar, and lulav. Okay, we understand what he means. It's not like tefillin. Tefillin is an obligation. You're not obligated to shecht an animal. Shofar, you're obligated to hear. So too lulav. But tzitzis, you're not obligated. You're not obligated to wear tzitzis. If you have a garment that has four corners and you're wearing it, you have to put tzitzis on. So in that case, tzitzis is like shechita. Shechita is if you have a need to eat meat, you have to shecht it. If you don't want to eat meat, you don't have to shecht it. Same thing with tzitzis. If you don't wear a four-cornered garment, you don't have to put on tzitzis. That's, of course, mitzvah should put on tzitzis, and there's some discussion about whether there is even a biblical obligation to wear tzitzis. But that's separate from the mitzvah of tzitzis. The mitzvah of tzitzis is to wear when you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you have to put on tzitzis. If you're not wearing it, the chiyuv, the obligation, isn't there. So what does the Kesef Mishnah mean to distinguish shechita from tzitzis? So the answer is, in Shulchan Aruch and Aruch Chaim, the beginning in Hilchos Tzitzis, the Alter Rebbe brings the Magen Avraham that when you make the bracha on tzitzis, you don't have to stand. Normally, brachas that you make for a mitzvah, you have to do standing. But there are several exceptions. One of the exceptions is hafrashas challah. When you separate challah, they're not such a big mitzvah. Why? Because it's only if you want to eat the things that require challah, you can't eat it unless you take challah. But other mitzvahs that you have to stand for, you have an obligation to do. Another exception, he says, is shechita, the bracha on shechita. You don't have such a big mitzvah because the mitzvahs are only there if you want to eat. If you don't want to eat, you don't have to shecht. So Rabbi Kiva Eger asks, there's a very big difference between tzitzis and shechita. Why? Because tzitzis, if you're not wearing a four-cornered garment, you don't have to put on tzitzis. So what's the difference between shechita and tzitzis? Why is it for tzitzis you have to stand, but for shechita you don't have to stand? So Rabbi Kiva Eger says, no, there's a very big difference. That tzitzis, if you're not wearing the garment, then you don't have no obligation to put it on. But once you put on the garment, you have a positive mitzvah to make tzitzis. You're not just doing it to fix the garment, that the garment should be acceptable. You're doing it because you have a chiyuv to put on tzitzis. To make this argument stronger, there's a psak of the Mordechai, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, that if someone's beged, the tzitzis rip on Shabbos, and he's wearing a four-cornered garment, and you can't put in tzitzis on Shabbos, nevertheless, he's allowed to wear the garment. Why? Because the prohibition is not to wear the garment without tzitzis. The mitzvah is if you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you have to put on tzitzis. But if you can't put on tzitzis, there's no prohibition of wearing the garment. That reinforces the Rabbi Kiva Eger's idea that when it comes to shechita, even though it's a mitzvahs essa, it's a mitzvahs essa that you don't have to do. You're not mechuyev to do it. You don't have to eat. You don't have to shecht. And if you want to eat, you're mekayim a mitzvah, but there's no obligation. Whereas tzitzis, once you wear the garment, there is a mitzvah to put on the tzitzis on that garment.